They laughed. She didn't flinch. Inside the marble halls of the United States Supreme Court, a storm was brewing. It was meant to be just another court session, a mere footnote in the High Court's legacy. But this day would become historic. What started with ridicule would end in detainment, and at the center of it all stood one woman, Pam Bondi. Attorney General Bondi stepped into the courtroom with a single objective: to expose a level of judicial misconduct no one dared to confront. Chief Justice John Roberts smirked as she approached the podium. Justice Amy Coney Barrett leaned back, already bored. They had no idea what was coming. What no one in the courtroom realized, not the clerks, not the press, not even the justices themselves, was that the most powerful people in the land were about to be held accountable in real time. The session began under the gaze of an unusually large crowd. Rumors had already swirled in legal circles that Bondi would challenge the court on grounds no attorney had dared before. Most assumed it was political theater. Chief Justice Roberts certainly did. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his tone dry, "I trust your presentation today will be more grounded in fact than your written brief." A soft laugh rippled through the gallery. Bondi did not respond. She simply adjusted the microphone. Justice Barrett added, her voice laced with derision, "We do admire enthusiasm even when it lacks legal merit." The clerk stifled chuckles. Cameras flashed. The gallery leaned in. Pam Bondi stood calmly in a fitted navy suit, a stack of organized notes at her side. "Thank you, Your Honors," she said coolly. "I'll allow the facts to speak for themselves." Roberts exchanged a glance with Barrett. "Please do," he said, waving his hand dismissively. Bondi began. "This case concerns repeated ethical breaches by members of this court in connection with the Westmoreland Foundation, a non-profit organization with financial ties to several recent rulings." "Ah, the conspiracy theory portion of today's docket," Roberts muttered. Barrett added with a smirk, "Do go on, Ms. Bondi. Let's all hear about the ghosts in the walls." Despite the interruptions, Bondi pressed on. "Our evidence includes subpoenaed financial records, internal communications, and sworn testimony that suggest improper coordination between this court and entities with active cases." Barrett leaned forward. "You're accusing sitting justices of corruption in front of a national audience based on speculation?" "No, Your Honor," Bondi replied. "I'm presenting documented violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 201, bribery of public officials." The room fell quiet for the first time. "Very serious claims," Roberts said slowly, his smirk fading slightly, "and very dangerous if false." Bondi didn't blink. "Which is why we verified every page," Barrett interjected again. "You have 30 minutes. Please don't waste the court's time." Bondi nodded once. "Understood, but let me be clear, this is not conjecture. This is accountability." Tension grew. The judges may have mocked her, but she wasn't flinching. What came next would silence even the loudest critics. Pam Bondi took a deliberate breath and glanced down at her notes. The weight of centuries of legal precedent and public scrutiny hung over her, but she showed no sign of cracking. "Your Honors," she began again, her voice steady. "In 2009, Chief Justice Roberts wrote that justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. I intend to hold this court to that standard today." Roberts leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. She turned to Barrett. "And in the 2020 Richardson opinion, Justice Barrett wrote, 'The impartiality of a judge is the cornerstone of judicial legitimacy. Any action that compromises that impartiality must be examined with full transparency.'" Barrett raised her eyebrows, caught off guard by the quote. Bondi continued, "With the court's permission, I'd like to present documentation showing a direct correlation between undisclosed donations and favorable outcomes in select rulings." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Justice Alito adjusted his glasses. Justice Kagan sat up straighter. Roberts forced a grin. "You're quoting us to accuse us? How creative." Bondi didn't smile. "Not accusing, Chief Justice. Demonstrating. Using your own words as the framework." She reached into her case file and produced a thick, sealed envelope. This contains communications between Justice Barrett's office and representatives from the Westmoreland Foundation, time-stamped within a week of oral arguments in Branson v. EPA. Barrett stiffened. That's a serious insinuation. Bondi calmly added, "They're not insinuations, they're emails." Gasps from the press section. Additionally, Bondi said, holding up a second envelope, "We have confirmation of wire transfers totaling over $250,000 to entities connected to the Roberts Family Trust, coinciding with the court's expedited ruling in Hamilton Energy versus United States." A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Roberts opened his mouth but didn't speak. Bondi concluded, "All verified, all reviewed by the Department of Justice." Roberts broke the silence with a forced chuckle. "Ms. Bondi, this isn't a criminal court." "No, Your Honor," she replied, "but what happens here determines whether it becomes one." With a nod, Bondi motioned toward the courtroom doors. A tall man in a dark suit entered, flanked by two others in navy windbreakers bearing the seal of the FBI. The gallery turned as one. "Special Agent Daniel Ramirez, DOJ Public Corruption Task Force," the man said, producing his credentials. "We have verified the materials submitted by Attorney General Bondi." Barrett rose slightly. "What jurisdiction?" Ramirez cut her off. "We are here under the authority of a FISA warrant issued by Judge Kenneth Lynn, D.C. Circuit, pertaining to suspected breaches of federal ethics statutes." Robert stood up, his tone rising. "This is outrageous. You're undermining judicial independence." Bondi spoke again. "You mean like deciding cases while accepting undisclosed financial gifts?" Ramirez handed a file to the clerk. Contained within is a breakdown of digital correspondence, bank records, and private meeting logs, all verified and entered under seal. We also have a sworn affidavit from a former clerk in Justice Barrett's chambers. Barrett looked stricken. Bondi faced the bench. "I request that this material be reviewed by the full court in chambers. However, I believe the court and the American public deserve to know the scope of what's been uncovered." She turned to the gallery. "This is not political. This is structural. If the rule of law is to mean anything, it must apply equally to all, even here." The silence was deafening. Ramirez stepped forward again. "We will now proceed with the preliminary evidentiary review, but I will advise the court that this investigation has already resulted in grand jury indictments sealed until this very hour." Barrett's hand dropped to her side. Robert sat heavily in his chair. And just like that, the courtroom mockery had ended. The reckoning had begun. The atmosphere inside the Supreme Court chamber shifted from tense to volatile. Justice Kagan leaned over and whispered to Justice Jackson, their eyes locked on the growing stack of documents laid before them. Justice Sotomayor looked visibly disturbed. Only Alito and Thomas sat still, their expressions unreadable. Justice Barrett, pale now, gripped the edge of the bench. "This isn't how the High Court operates," she said weakly. "Not until today," Bondi answered. Special Agent Ramirez activated a small tablet connected to a screen at the front of the courtroom. "With the court's permission, we will begin presentation of Exhibit C, encrypted messages between Justice Roberts and a private consultant for the Westmoreland Foundation." A series of text messages appeared. Names were redacted, but context and timestamps told the story. Roberts: "The decision needs to come through fast. Quiet pressure already applied." Consultant: "Funds moved. Expect coverage to follow." Gasps erupted. Barrett stood up, trembling. "This is an ambush." "No," Bondi said. "This is the unveiling." Ramirez continued, "We now introduce Exhibit D, wire transfers, traced to Barrett Family Holdings, LLC. 3 days after the ruling in Branson v. EPA, more murmurs. Justice Kagan raised a hand. "We need to adjourn. This needs to be reviewed, and privately." "No," Bondi countered. "The public has the right to witness accountability, especially here." Ramirez produced 2 large envelopes. "These are sealed indictments, returned yesterday by a federal grand jury. Based on evidence submitted over 14 months of covert investigation, they authorized the detainment of 2 members of this court." "Who authorized this?" Roberts asked, eyes narrowing. Ramirez looked directly at him. "Judge William Merrick, Eastern District of Virginia." Bondi added, with unanimous approval from the DOJ's Internal Oversight Division. Barrett sat down slowly, her expression blank. Justice Jackson closed her folder. If even a portion of this is true, we have a duty to the people. Ramirez raised his voice slightly. Court officers, please secure the area. This is now an active federal process. The audience was frozen. Reporters typed furiously. Court staff hesitated, unsure if they were witnessing theater or history. Bondi took one final step forward. Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Barrett, do you have anything you wish to say before these proceedings continue? Neither responded. Ramirez walked to the center aisle, flanked by two agents. Pursuant to Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 201 and 1512, you are both hereby served federal arrest warrants for bribery of public officials and obstruction of justice. He laid two thick folders on the bench. The courtroom was still. Barrett blinked rapidly, reaching for the document. This can't be legal. The Constitution guarantees due process, Ramirez said, and due process is exactly what this is. Robert stood stiffly. The court will not be shamed like this. We are the law. Bondi's reply was quiet but firm. Not above it. Cameras snapped as court officers moved in. Justice Alito and Thomas stood and exited quietly, without a word. Justice Kagan remained frozen, watching every moment. As Roberts and Barrett were escorted from the bench, the gallery erupted, not in applause, but in stunned, hushed awe. A courtroom once steeped in tradition had become the setting of a national reckoning. Pam Bondi turned to face the gallery. The rule of law means nothing if it only applies to the ruled and never the rulers. Today we begin to correct that. The gavel fell, not in judgment of her, but of those who thought they were untouchable. The Supreme Court building, once a symbol of unshakable power, stood silent. Outside, news cameras crowded the steps, capturing what would soon dominate headlines across every outlet in the country. A court marred by scandal. Justices led out not by honor, but by agents. Inside, the gallery emptied slowly as if leaving a sacred space desecrated. Pam Bondi remained at the center of it all. She gathered her notes, methodical and composed, as clerks whispered among themselves. The atmosphere was no longer hostile. It was reverent. Justice Kagan approached her. You understand what this will unleash. Bondi met her gaze. It was already unleashed. We just exposed it. Kagan nodded solemnly and turned away. Outside, floodlights bathed the press circle. Microphones extended like antennas toward a truth no one expected to confront. Bondi stepped before the cameras. This is not a victory, she began. This is an obligation. The obligation to ensure our institutions uphold the integrity they demand of others. Today's events were not about politics. They were about principle. A flurry of questions followed, but Bondi raised her hand. The Department of Justice will release full documentation in coordination with the Office of the Inspector General. Investigations are ongoing. Let the facts speak louder than spin. Behind her, Justice Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts were seen entering a black SUV under escort. Their faces were blank, drained of the power they once held. Hours later, the footage would loop endlessly, the arrests, the evidence, the stunned reactions from legal giants. Across social media, reactions ignited like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. SCOTUS scandal. Bondi breaks the bench. Justice is blind again. Commentators scrambled to understand the implications. Legal scholars called it the greatest accountability moment in judicial history. Others questioned how deep the corruption reached. But in one corner of the country, in a quiet office lit by a desk lamp and stacks of paper, Pam Bondi reviewed the next case file. The war for justice wasn't over. This was just one battle won. The message had been sent. Power does not equal immunity. And for once, the system didn't protect itself. As dawn broke over Washington, D.C., the Supreme Court doors remained shut. But their echoes, the echoes of a day where law bowed not to robes, but to truth, reverberated across a nation. Pam Bondi had not just presented a case, she had changed history.